happy for Mickey Joseph that he got a head coaching gig, but the contract that Grambling gave him was an absolute raw deal. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics. Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey's over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On to get $20 off your first purchase. We'll close today's episode looking at Norfolk State's big-time victory over Morgan State and the ramifications of that outcome for both teams. Before that, we'll look at Mississippi Valley State, who got their first win of the season over Prairie View A&M. And it's not just because they're facing PV that I'm highlighting it. I think everything around that made a truly special moment. And we kick it off with some news that I wish I didn't have to come to you with today. But I believe that Grambling gave Mickey Joseph an absolute terrible contract for him. Now, let me give the details. I'm glad that he's coaching. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad. And sometimes you got to take raw deals to be able to get through the door. You know, I was listening to a Young Thug interview on the Breakfast Club. I'm sure many of you have heard it by now, where he was like, yeah, I knew the deal was crooked, but I took it because I knew what I could do if I just got into the door. I knew that it was a bad deal, but I took it because I had hopes and aspirations of what I could make from said bad deal. Maybe that's Mickey Joseph's way of looking at this deal, because it's not quality. The money, solid. It's a 3-year contract with air quotes for those on the audio side. That's a 3-year contract, $325,000 per year. Solid contract. I don't have any problem with the compensation. It's $75,000 less than Hugh Jackson, but Hugh also came with the NFL cachet, the bigger name. I understand. They weren't going to get paid the same amount. That's okay. You have the typical incentives as far as success goes, you know, HBCU national champion, Celebration Bowl championship, SWAC championship, coach of the year, Bayou Classic winner. If they change to the FBS, there's a certain 1-year payment that you get from that. If you make an FCS playoff game, you will get a certain amount for that. The most he can make on any given year is $405,000. I have no problem with the payment. The payment is not where I say it's a raw deal. That's not the crooked part. The crooked part is the fact that I had to put air quotes over a 3-year deal. It's essentially a 2-year deal with the demand of instant results, high-level results at that. Otherwise, you likely won't get a 3-year deal. Let me not give my conclusions. Let me not give my takeaway before I tell you what it literally is. So there's a 3rd-year option that can go into place if he wins 8 games in a season. And though that may not seem like a lot, trust me when I tell you that is high-level success in the SWAC. That is a really, really, really good season to have in the SWAC. It's not something that you see a lot of teams do on any given year. So that's why overall I think it's crooked, because you're saying essentially this is a 2-year deal. If you're not a great team within the first 2 years, we're more than likely going to move on from you. That's what that tells me. Because why not just give him a 3-year deal? Why does it need to have this 8-game win in a season stipulation on it? To me, that doesn't make sense unless you're planning on moving on from him, unless he achieves that. So let's look at the, excuse me, let's look at that 8-game threshold. Number one, Grambling hasn't hit that threshold since 2017. That's strictly on the school that he's taking over in the history that they've had. Let's look at the SWAC in general. Over the last 3 seasons, only 2 teams have hit that: Jackson State and FAMU. Those are the only 2 teams that have won 8 games in a season. FAMU has done it each of the last 3 years. Jackson State did it the last 2 years prior to 2023. That's it. And when you go back, it's never more, going back 4 or 5 years, it's never more than 2 teams who get past 8 wins or get to 8 wins. So that tells me that Grambling, who put in this stipulation that, yeah, you get that extra year if you get 8 wins, they're demanding you be one of the top 2 teams in the SWAC in your first 2 years taking over. There's a difference between hopes and aspirations and standards. That's why I don't like when people say this is the bar. This is not the bar if that's the high you want to reach. The bar has to be, to me, the bar is set where anything less than that is a failure. Right now, 8 games is the bar for Mickey Joseph, and 8 games will make him one of the best teams in the SWAC in his first 2 years. That is an unrealistic standard. It may happen, but to say if you're not doing that, you're a failure, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. I think it's unfair to put that on him. And it makes me think about Grambling. It makes me think about Hugh Jackson. It now tells me this was not a Hugh problem. And I've been hard on Hugh. Like, that's just truth. I've been hard on Hugh probably more than most people have been hard on Hugh. But I don't mind it. I'm okay with that. After the first year, I said, all right, Hugh might be on that hot seat. After his second year, I said he's definitely going to be on the hot seat, but I felt he should have returned for year 3. I thought he did enough. But now I understand why he probably didn't do enough. If we're looking at Mickey Joseph's contract and we're saying Joseph is given a 2-year deal, and he'll get that 3rd year if he wins 8 games in a season, Hugh Jackson didn't do that. I don't know if that was a part of his deal, but that's clearly the mindset of Grambling. You don't put that into the next coach's deal unless that is truly your mindset to how the team should be ran. I believe if you expect your team to be a top 2, top 3 team in the conference under a new coach, you likely would not have had that new coach in the first place. Like, that's why I think it's unrealistic. That's how I look at it. I'm not a fan of it at all. But knowing how Grambling is moving with Mickey Joseph, it answers a lot of questions for how I felt they moved with Hugh Jackson. I'll put it that way. And I'm not a fan of how they treat Mickey Joseph with this contract. And I'm not a fan of how they treated Hugh Jackson by what I can conclude, by what I can assume with all of the information put in front of me. Bad business on my point of view. But as we move forward, let's keep it in the SWAC. Mississippi Valley State has won their first game. They have their first W of the season, and it came against Prairie View A&M. We'll look at that moment and the game itself as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Go to the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On if you're new to Gametime. If this is your first time using the Gametime app, I understand. Maybe a big event is coming up in the city very soon, and you want to make sure that you have the best price tickets. And anytime you want something at the best price, there's only one place I would tell you to go, and that's Gametime. Maybe you're in a city where you want to go see wrestling. I know wrestling's coming to Dallas very soon, not that far from where I am. Maybe you want to go to a sporting event, maybe like the Mavericks. And I say this because there's a lot of HBCUs who have a heavy base in Dallas or in the DFW. There's plays, there's concerts, there's comedy shows, and those things are everywhere that aren't specific to certain teams or certain events. All you have to do is download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code Locked On, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. The one thing about it is once you use it, you'll continue to go back, and I can guarantee you that. Go to Gametime, use the code Locked On, and get $20 off your first purchase. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, the first of its kind, 24/7, all day, every day, live sports network on YouTube. Go to Locked On Sports Today and subscribe. Now, Mississippi Valley State got their first win of the season And normally I wouldn't even cover a Mississippi Valley State versus Prairie View A&M game. Normally that would be a game that happened and it's whatever. Even with this being their first win, I probably just would have been like, all right, I'm going to leave it alone. But this was genuinely one of the best moments that I've seen on Twitter in a long time when we're talking about HBCU sports. Valley is mathematically eliminated. Prairie View seems to be clearly on their way to the same fate. Doesn't matter. It doesn't. This is one of those times when I don't care about records. I don't even really care about the players who are on the court. God's honest. What I care about is the moment for those fans, for the team in general, and for that broadcasting crew. And I want to break down each of those aspects on today's episode. So forget the tournament focus. We're going to break that trend to cover this moment. Mississippi Valley State up to this point was 0-27, meaning they hadn't won a game, not only in SWAC play. They didn't win any out-of-conference games prior to the season. Nothing. This was a struggling team. And I had said it, man. I just had a feeling they weren't going to go winless. That just wasn't going to be the outcome. And I was nervous. TSU faced the same team on Saturday, and I was nervous because it felt like a trap game. And I just always said, don't be that team. Don't be the team that gives Mississippi Valley their first victory. Don't be. You can be two. It'll look bad no matter, but don't be one. Right? Because now they're sitting there at 1-27. Now, let's say that they don't win another game. If you go and look at those standings and you see a 1-20, or probably there's about 3 games left. Yeah, so you see a 1-30 team. You're going to go and look, who is that one? It's Prairie View A&M. And I'll tell you right now, I would insert a Stephen A. Smith type of laugh, but that ain't my stilo. And it'll sound extremely forced. So all I will say is that it couldn't have happened to a better team. And boy, I'll tell you, it's not even about the fact that it happened to PV, but the fact that it happened to him definitely adds a little extra something to it for me. Adds a little extra joy for me, because a lot of me is just excited for Mississippi Valley State themselves. Nobody deserves to go winless. I sat through a winless football season. I sat through it. It sucks. It don't feel good. It's miserable. I don't know if I would have continued to go to the games, but I was covering them. It's very difficult as a student. I can only assume it's even more difficult as a player to go in every year or go in every week, every game, whether you're playing basketball, if you're playing football, multiple games a week in basketball. It's very difficult to go into every game motivated the same when you just keep losing. It's very difficult to go into practice the same when you just keep losing. So maybe you can ride this one victory out for the rest of the year. Ain't that many games left. You only got 3 more this weekend and Monday. Like, it's really back-to-back. You don't have much basketball left if you're Mississippi Valley State. But you were able to get this victory. And for the fans, after that game, they stormed the court. And it was so funny. Shout out my guy, Mo. Mo sent me this video, right? And I was like, man, it's only like 30 of them. He said they stormed the court. And it was only like 30 of those guys, 30 of those girls. But in a way, the fact that it was less people, A, it made a lot of sense. B, it was very representative of the season. And C, it highlighted the loyalty of those people who did storm the court. You're 0-27. I'm gonna tell you that. I'm telling you right now. 0-27, I'm not going to the game. Like, I'm not going. Losing that many games consecutively will test the strongest of the fans, the most loyal, die-hard alumni. It'll test you to lose 27 games in a row in that one season. But for those 25, 30 people who are out there, that's kudos to you. I got to tip your hat, because you didn't show up because you were storming the field. You showed up, or storming the court. You showed up because you were loyal to the squad. You were loyal to the school and loyal to this team. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. It spoke volumes. I don't need to talk trash about PV anymore. This is beyond them at this point. They had to be that one. They're going to deal with it. But when you're looking at those fans, it was a moment. Tell me this. When do you think the last time that anybody stormed anything at Mississippi Valley State was? You're part of a moment. This is a moment where it's as crazy as it sounds to talk about a 1-27 team. You'll never forget this. This will be a moment that they will never forget. I don't know if the team will feel the same way, but those fans will never forget that moment. That's extreme loyalty, and you have to commend that. And the last thing I want to commend is the broadcast crew. And you know what? Honestly, it probably should have been the first thing that I commended because it was the best part of it all. Shout out to those two young brothers. They were clearly students in the game, or students on the team, broadcast team, who are working their way into the business. And you know I love that. I got a soft spot for that because that was me. That was me. So now that is not, hearing them in the way that they spoke, they were unpolished. They hadn't been doing this for 20 years. They were raw. But because they were raw, they were real. Because they were raw and real, you could feel the emotion. I felt like a Mississippi Valley State student in that moment. I felt like him. I felt like both of those guys because I know how I would have been in that position at that time. And I like to think that I'm polished now at 25. Like I like to think that. But I've been doing this for 2.5 years every single day. Every single day I've been doing this for 2.5 years almost, right? Since November 2021. 5 days a week, 3 days a week during the summers. Like I have a lot of reps. But I could imagine who I was then. And I see it. And I think they did a great job. Like some people may say they sounded like students, man, but I feel like that's what was needed. Yes, if you're 20 years into the game, and I love Chatterbox, right? That's the voice of TSU. Chatterbox would have had a great broadcast in that moment. But Chatterbox's great podcast or great broadcast, excuse me, Chatterbox's great broadcast would not have sounded like their great podcast. It would not have sounded the same. So I don't know the name of those two gentlemen, but I want to commend them. I want to give them a round of applause because I believe that their style made that moment greater. Going up there and saying Mississippi Valley State Delta Devils is on a 1-game winning streak. Ain't no such thing as a 1-game winning streak for real. And I don't know if they did that on purpose. Maybe a more seasoned person wouldn't have said it, but you wouldn't have gotten that moment. That's a line. That's a bar. That encapsulates the moment that you're going into. The pure emotion. I could tell. I can tell when people aren't thinking before they speak, and you're just coming from the heart. And that's what they did. I loved it. I thought it was the best part of it all. And you got to remember, it wasn't a buzzer beater. So to have that pure emotion to just come out of you at the end of a game, I felt like I was one of those students. I felt like I had sat through 27 of those games. I felt like I finally had a monkey off of my back, despite the fact that I'm in no way related to Valley. There's no relation between Valley and I, but I felt everything. And I'm telling you right now, there's not a lot of broadcasts that will make you feel everything. And the ones that do are great. That was a phenomenal call by those young gentlemen. And I don't know who they are, but I hope whoever they are, somebody from Valley is listening and can show that. I think that was phenomenal. I think that was absolutely great. So I wanted to make sure I highlighted that. It was a year and a day from the last time that they won a game. February 25th, 2023 was the last time that Valley won a game, men's basketball, and they won one again on February 26th. I don't know what happens the rest of the year. I don't care. This was a freaking moment. Now, as you push forward, we're going to look at Norfolk State. This isn't a one-time, this is a moment for them. This is what they do. They knocked off Morgan State, but they're way closer to clinching the MEAC after this victory, and we'll look at it as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, the NBA is rolling. The NFL draft is on the way. The combine is on the way. NHL is going on. MLB is not that far away. There's so many different options that you can put your money down on. Live betting as well as before the game. And I typically come on and talk about how, you didn't get there before the game. You can do live betting, but you can do both. You can do both. Things change as the game goes on. The spreads are different. So all you have to do is say, you know what? I know I put down my money on Wembanyama before the game, but I'm going to put down this live bet as well and see what he can hit. There's different ways to make your money and make your money multiply. So all you have to do is go to fanduel.com/locked on to make every moment more. But you have to remember, if you're new to FanDuel, put down a $5 bet and win, you'll get $150 back in bonus bets. So FanDuel wants to reward you for being new to the website while also being a winner by giving you bonus bets with a $5 winning bet. That's fanduel.com/locked on. Make every moment more. As wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Now, making it all the way to segment 3 as well, and I thank you 2 times for that. Now, I want to break down Norfolk State's big victory over Morgan State. Once Norfolk knocked off North Carolina Central, the first thing I was doing was looking at Morgan State's game. It was a week away. I wasn't worried about Saturday or anything of the sort. I was looking at Norfolk State versus Morgan State. At that time, I didn't know what was going on with Morgan State. I believe Morgan State was on a 2-3 game winning streak at the time, if I'm not mistaken. But they were a part of that 5-team mashup. They were part of that team that I was like, okay, let's see what's going on afterwards. So I was still hyped. But now you're looking at Morgan State on a 3-game losing streak. And I guess that takes a little bit of luster from the Norfolk State victory. But if I'm on a 4-game winning streak, which is what Norfolk State is on, if I'm sitting alone, comfy, cushy, at the top of the MEAC with a 2-game lead on the closest team to me, why do I give a you-know-what about style points? Why do I care about what the team looked like? At this point, we're looking for the number 1 seed. That it doesn't matter how we get there. We want the number 1 seed. The respect that comes with the number 1 seed is way greater than, oh, but I knocked off North Carolina Central. Shut up talking to me. And that's how I would look at it. I knocked off, don't think North Carolina Central's 2. I get it. They've been having struggles. I knocked off Howard. I've knocked off everybody except for Maryland Eastern Shore. The second to last team. They got me. So when you want to talk about competition, I ain't worry about that. Style points don't mean nothing in this situation. It's irrelevant. That's factual. It's irrelevant. It's all about where do you place at the end of the year. That's the only thing that matters at this point. Like I told you at the beginning of segment 2, typically my eyes are on the tournament. I broke that to cover a great moment, but my eyes are still on the tournament. This time it's the MEAC tournament. So Norfolk State don't care about no style points or anything of the sort. They're about to go in. They're going to try to beat Delaware State. Then on Monday, they got Maryland Eastern Shore. And I already know you're going to be motivated for that game. In the words of my brother, you already know they're going to be motivated for that game. Because they can't be swept by that team. Shouldn't have lost to them the first time. I know they feel that way. So they're probably going to put a real beat down on them. If I had to guess, that would be their motivation. So now they're sitting there with a 2-game lead. Howard's close. I think North Carolina Central, is close. I think they're tied with Howard. And then I think it's just those. No, it's one more. South Carolina State. Those 3 teams, I believe, are all at 7-4. Yeah, they are. 2-game lead. You got the tiebreaker over Howard if you beat them. You still get to play them. You can go ahead and knock them off. You be done. I think you have the tiebreak over North Carolina Central because I believe you won by more. And I that could just be a swag thing, but still, you split that game at the worst. South Carolina State dealt with them. Like, you're really comfortable with where you are. And you're very close to where if you knock off Delaware State on Saturday, you may clinch the conference already, or you may be 1 game away. And we'll look at that as time goes on. Morgan State, they're on a 3-game losing streak, but things are still wide open for them. They could still arguably be the 2 seed, be as high as number 2. They're only 2 games behind South Carolina State, North Carolina Central, Howard. Those 3 teams are all tied at 7-4. Meanwhile, Morgan State is at 5-6. That's not far at all. If they win out, they'll be no lower than 3, 4, maybe. Yeah, 4 probably. They'll be no lower than 4. You have a top half seed. Because you get to play North Carolina Central and you get to play South Carolina State. And those two teams have to face each other as well. So if you win out, one of them will have 2 losses, and you have completed a sweep over both of them. So you'll have the tiebreaker. This is a great situation for Morgan State still. Things are still wide open, but they have to do a 180. They can't continue on the path that they currently are. But yeah, overall, the impact of this game is it gives Morgan State more pressure to look forward to, and it gives Norfolk State more cushion to lean into. So I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Maybe you feel comfortable, or maybe you feel pressured to listen to. Either way, you're listening, and I appreciate it. But eventually, you'll get comfortable. But I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Remember, tomorrow we'll be back with another episode. I'm not sure what we're gonna look at. I got quite a few things. I got about 5 to 6 topics that I'm looking at between which one am I going to pick. I'm not sure, but I think that. Oh, yeah, we're definitely going to look at Dooley returning to the SWAC and going to Grambling, because we already knew that was going to happen. But, man, Jason Rollins are returning to the SWAC, but this time they'll be at Grambling. So I appreciate you. In the meantime, in between time, until next time that we hear each other, family, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.